Shanker, is that what you were expecting, or from a United Kingdom point of view, it's on the good side, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it was more or less what we were expecting. So he waved around a book there. There's the National Trade Estimate, which is the inventory of foreign country trade barriers. And if you look through the book, you'll see a direct correlation between the size of a country's entry and the tariff that they've received. So he's obviously looked at three buckets. One is how open is your trade regime, and then this talking about regulatory barriers, and behind the border barriers, how competitive is your market, how well do you protect property rights. And the analysis that USTR has done is to look at all of those areas and to come up with an evaluation of the sort of tariff effect. And we actually did an exercise on the G20 where we looked at this, and actually we got very similar numbers. The UK did, in our exercise, came in at 7%. Europeans came in at 22%. So you can see the process that they've gone through. I think he said two things that are important going forward. One is if you want to lower the tariff that you're paying, then you need to either manufacture in the US, that if you can, but more importantly, I think lower the barriers. That's, lower the tariff, lower the barriers. And some of these developing countries that got very hard hit, they got hard hit because their tariff structure is very high. It's relatively easy for them to lower the tariff. It's going to be much harder for the EU to eliminate the regulatory restrictions and so on. The UK, I think we've got a good chance now of a deal, but I think it's a pretty cold evaluation of countries' barriers and distortions, and I don't think there was much more to it than that. I think the next phase, all your relationships, all of those things, that becomes really important.
I was speaking to someone in the pharmaceutical sector earlier today, and they said, this stuff doesn't just happen overnight. It takes years for companies, for businesses to relocate anything around the world. And, that's going to take 5 years, they said, if they were going to put any of their pharmaceutical business, of which they already have a significant chunk in the US, if they were going to put more of that there, it would take them 5 years to build a factory there. Compared to that, Brian, who I presume was one of the steel workers or car worker in question, he said, we're going to see the fruits of this within 6 months to a year. That seems incredibly optimistic. And of course, it's not counting the impact on US consumers. The Donald Trump says it's going to make it cheaper. He says it's going to be increasing competition. It's going to mean that prices will be cheaper. I would love to hear Shanker's view on that. Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, I think you've got to sort of take a step back and where he's correct to diagnose this problem, and this is not Donald Trump particularly, this is a historical US industry view, is that if you look at those three buckets, the damage from regulatory barriers and distortions and so on is much, much higher. And while we've done a good job generally in the last 30 or 40 years of lowering tariffs, we've not done a good job of lowering those distortions around the world. They've proliferated out of control. It's not just affecting the US, it's affecting everybody. I mean, and so what you're seeing here is a kind of realignment of, I am going to focus on these things and you're going to focus on these things, because if you want to do a deal with me to lower that tariff, you better focus on those things. So that's a radically new trade era that we've just entered into. And I think the people who grasp that quickly, because I don't think it's going to be about it's going to be hard, you're right. It's going to be very hard to sort of relocate manufacturing. In fact, in many cases, it's not possible to relocate manufacturing in certain things. But what is possible is to lower those distortions. So if you can convince, if you're a manufacturer that's hit by this and you can convince your government to lower those distortions and those regulatory barriers and so forth, then the tariff's going to go down. And that's kind of the pressure he's applying through this. It may work, it may not work. If the result of this is everyone retaliates, the distortions don't go down, then we're heading towards a really bad outcome.
But he's given us, or he's given everybody that out, hasn't he?
Yes,
by saying,
absolutely.
Actually, there is a way out of this. And that's something I didn't expect him to say.
But that will have to be very clearly communicated. Otherwise, if the markets and the bond market in particular don't understand what's going on, then the cost of borrowing in the US will skyrocket and he won't be able to do his tax cut.
A very interesting question here from James, very perceptive. Wrong to say the UK, Northern Ireland will be hit by tariffs on the EU. Well, Shanker Singham will know the answer to that, because Northern Ireland has got a foot in both camps, hasn't it? How does that work?
Yeah, so Northern Ireland. If you're a business in Northern Ireland and you're exporting to the US, you're part of the UK customs territory, so you're affected by the UK tariff. The issue for Northern Ireland though is different. It's what happens when the EU retaliates. So the EU will announce their retaliation on April the 14th. If they retaliate with tariffs on American origin goods, the Harley Davidson motorcycles, the bourbon, etc., then everything that moves from GB to Northern Ireland across the boundary will be subject to that retaliatory tariff. And if you can show that it stays in Northern Ireland, you can claim it back. But you will be subject to the tariff, and then you'll have to claim it back. And if, given the China tariff was pretty high here, 34%, it's probable that countries will have to safeguard their markets. In other words, they'll have a safeguarding duty. And again, Northern Ireland will be affected. So if the EU has a safeguarding duty on all China origin stuff, then when that goes from GB to Northern Ireland, you'll have to pay a safeguarding duty of typically 25% on that as well. So it's going to be tough for Northern Ireland importers. And there is a process for reclaiming the tariff back, and we hope that will work effectively for people whose products are staying in Northern Ireland.
Could this be another source of contention between Britain and the EU?
Well, it's pretty certain the EU will use this as a vehicle to try to pull the UK back from whatever they might negotiate with the US to drop the US rate. And it's obviously very important that boundary between GB and Northern Ireland works as effectively as it possibly can.
Where does this leave us with a UK-USA trade deal? Because I don't know, Shanker, what you were hearing about how close that is, but there were thoughts that they would have tried to wrap that up before today.
Yeah, no, I think it was inevitable that nothing is going to happen before today, because this is Donald Trump in leverage building mode. So you're not going to do a deal with somebody who's in leverage building mode. He's got the leverage now. Now he's in deal mode. So, as he said to all countries just on that conference, he basically said, look, if you want to lower your tariff, do a deal with me and lower your barriers, lower your risk distortions. I think the UK, if you look at the UK entry in that national trade estimate, there's a lot of things that we can do. I think it sounds like the government is signalling that they will do a lot of them. You don't have to do everything. You just have to make a good faith effort to do some of the things that he's asked for, and I think we probably will get this deal.
But would that deal mean that this 10% becomes 0% and the car tariffs would be wiped out altogether? Because that would be a tremendous trade advantage for us vis-à-vis the EU, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it will be, because if you do a deal and it's a trade agreement deal, that will be zero tariffs, and you'll agree your market access, and so I think that's what the goal would be from the UK negotiators, and how much you get of that will depend on how much you're prepared to do.
Natasha, Shanker, thank you very much indeed for coming in to analyse what Donald Trump said.